Hi everyone, welcome to today's Facebook Live. Whilst we're waiting for everybody to join, I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm really excited about today's panel, but I want to make sure everybody can hear us okay, see us okay. This has been broadcasted through StreamYard, so unless you give permission, I won't be able to see your name on any comments and things like that. So can people please just give me a thumbs up, drop a comment, just so I know which platform you're coming in from. So that'll be great. I can see people are starting to log in now. So do that. Before we get going, I also want to remind everybody this coming Wednesday, so a week today, we have Vanessa Roth with us. You guys often hear me referring to her as the sourcing queen. So her and I will be in the group talking about the importance sourcing, and not just that. It's great when we've got a list of candidates, we've got names, but what do we do with that? So Vanessa and I are going to be talking about that next week. So make sure you sign in for that, and I'll get the post and the broadcast and what have you up later this week. Just giving you a heads up on that one. A couple of weeks down the road, this is going to be middle of April. Just got to confirm the dates. Super excited to bring an international panel together around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the staffing industry. So again, I'll publish the details closer to the time. We've got a phenomenal panel lined up, and both today's guests are also going to be on that panel. So without further ado, let's get going. Let me introduce everybody. Our first guest is Ange. Ange is the senior client partner for Brunel Energy. And we also have, all the way from South Africa, Roy. Roy is co-founder of Clark House Human Capital, South Africa. So welcome to today's panel, and thanks for joining us. So before we get going, Ange, do you just want to take a quick minute and introduce yourself I know most of the viewers know you, but just introduce yourself to those that don't.
Sure. So my name is Angelina Brathwaite, and I work for Brunel Energy. It's a global staffing and recruitment agency. And my responsibilities ultimately is business acquisition, account management, managing recruitment teams. But in addition to that, I'm also responsible for leading the DEI initiative across North America. So that's the edited version of who I am.
And yourself, Roy?
Yeah, good morning to you and good morning to everybody. Good afternoon, my time. I'm the Managing Director of Clark House Human Capital. We're a global talent partner where we not only find talent globally, but we also enable that talent. And we enable that talent through our advisory or consultancy arm of our business. And a very big component of that consultancy arm is the work we do in diversity. It's something that is very close to our business. It's very close to what is happening in our country, and not only in our country, but in the world, where there's such an emphasis on diversity. We've been exploring this topic for a number of years now, so very excited to be on this panel, and thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. I'm super excited to have this conversation and lean on both of your experience, expertise, because here's the thing. As a staffing industry, we have a massive role to play. But one of the places we have to start is internally. We got to look at ourselves as an industry and ensure that we, for lack of a better word, our own house is in order. And we actually understand, and we're equipping our teams and employees to be able to handle that conversation. And one of the things I personally have learned working with both yourself on this in this area is there are so many unconscious biases that we have that we're not even aware of. So I really want to take the time today to help our viewers and people in the group just to sit back and reflect a second and really recognize the role they play consciously and subconsciously in the biases in the hiring process and things like that. So I guess let's kick off with yourself, Angelina, because you are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, not only from a personal experience perspective, but you're dealing with international clients. You're having these conversations. You're heading up the internal conversation as well. What are some of your thoughts and learnings, and what are you seeing happening?
Well, I'm starting to see a shift in mindset, and a lot of that has been brought on through events that have happened recently or in 2020, in addition to the pandemic. I believe what it has done is that we've had to look internally at ourselves to see the type of impact we're having on the world based on our behaviors. And so what we've done at Brunel is we've taken an internal pulse to see how are we contributing to creating an environment that is equitable for all individuals, regardless of their race or their financial status or their mental health. So we've taken a pulse to see where we are internally. And so what we've done is we've created some surveys, we're establishing some metrics, we're ensuring that our recruitment processes reflect what the realities are there outside to ensure that, like I said, that there's equitable practices for everybody.
And Roy, I just want to quickly bring you in, because I know you've been doing not only just within South Africa, but I know you've been working on some a global initiative and projects. What are some of the things you've seen, not just from a local perspective, but from some of the global conversations that you're having right now?
So I think it's a very interesting time given where the world is. I mean, there's been some clear factors that have come, through the ranks globally. Black Lives Matter. It's even going back a week or two ago about the Harry and Meghan interview. So there's what we're seeing is that in the past, diversity was this kind of buzzword. It was kind of this thing that people were talking about, and it was often widely spoken about, but not really, really understood. And I think what we're seeing is there's a much bigger shift towards really kind of trying to unpack what diversity and inclusion actually means. What is it? I mean, I think what we're also seeing is there are a lot of firms, both in my country and globally, that are creating really cool roles, like Chief Diversity Officer, Diversity and Inclusion Managers, which is really, really a good thing. I think it's really phenomenal seeing the focus becoming, in the past, it used to be some, go and kind of have a conversation, over a cup of coffee and tea around it. Whereas now it's becoming actual people's job functions to drive that, which is a good thing, right? So no one's taking that away. But what I think the big hurdle is for most companies is that what we're looking at is that diversity has been very much based on a desire for compliance and maybe not a genuine wish to restructure, and specifically the new world works. And I think that's something I'd really like to kind of touch on, is that I feel people are trying to break away from this compliance aspect and seeing that there actually is a massive business case. It's undeniable. But when we link the human case to that business case, that's where the magic happens. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of companies like the idea of diversity, but they're trying to really fit it into pre-existing structures. And I think people are realizing, you maybe can't, you can't fit a square peg into a round hole. And there needs to be new thinking around what is diversity and inclusion? What does it actually mean? I think a lot of people look at it as black, white, male, female. That's kind of how people narrow-mindedly think of it. But it actually, Suki, it's a complex set of human capital expressions. It's like a Rubik's Cube. You can't just focus on one side. You've got to actually look at everything. All workplace strategies impacted. Leadership, culture, the purpose of your organization, innovation, transformation. These are key components of what diversity and inclusion means. So what I'm liking is that there's a new energy and a new focus around what does this actually mean. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, Suki, it's really disrupting the norms and it's dismantling the system because people are accustomed to doing things a certain way. And so what these DEI initiatives are doing is it's causing individuals to have uncomfortable conversations, those conversations that they might not have had before. And so it's really breaking it up very granular and ensuring that people are really giving it the lens that it requires in order to see change. It's really creating that disruption.
It's really interesting because what I was going to do is something very similar. So let's get right into it, because one of the reasons I wanted to bring this panel into the group, I'm having numerous conversations with staffing agencies, both owners, executives, desk level people, where their clients are asking them for a female leaders is a prime example. Now, and they're not equipped to have that conversation, and I want to just peel back the layers. I'll admit myself, this is a conversation until I really started speaking with both of yourself. I was pretty ignorant. I didn't think I was ignorant on it, but I was. And it's an uncomfortable conversation because we don't feel we're equipped. We don't know what to say. We don't know how to even start the conversation. So I want to be able to give everybody in the group the opportunity to get some sort of framework. It's like, well, first of all, how do you even start the conversation? What is diversity? Because one of the things that Angie, you taught me was when we were talking about this, and I can't remember the exact example you gave me, but it was something to do with, we were talking about policy, and you said, does a policy, a fully inclusive policy should include parents who have children with disabilities, special needs? And that wasn't even something that I'd even thought about. So how do people actually start having this conversation internally? What are some of the differences and nuances around the word? Okay, because to your point earlier, everybody looks at it and says gender, color of your skin, disability, and it stops there, but it's just so much more than that. So, Angie, if you want to take that, how does somebody even start that conversation internally?
Yeah, so referring to a person as diverse is increasingly used as a code for people who belong to groups considered non-dominant or those who are historically less privileged, right? So if you, for instance, if you're speaking about somebody who's transgendered, by default, that person is not normalized. So we have to be careful on how we utilize the word, because diversity isn't just people, but it's teams. So companies have to take a look at it and consider it as a team, not necessarily as an individual. Does that make sense?
Yep. And Roy, do you have anything to add to that? You're on mute.
Unmute button. I said I do. I've just got to find the unmute button. So agree with Angelina. I think one of the key components is that there needs to be a much better understanding around the definition of diversity and inclusion and what it actually means and what it actually doesn't mean. Because I think people have this kind of fear connotation towards diversity. There are a lot of myths around it. People look at it as scarcity. They look at it as one or the other. You know what I mean? So people naturally start, shielding up. It's like, well, I could be out. I am privileged. I have come from a privileged background. Therefore, I have to make way for someone who maybe doesn't. And I think what that has to do is we have to really unpack those definitions. What does diversity and inclusion actually mean? And it needs to be looked at bigger than just an individual. It's about a range of things, as Angelina points out. One of the best definitions I've ever heard of diversity, and this is not, for the dictionary, but diversity is really about inviting people into your home. Okay, that's what diversity is: inviting everybody and anybody into your home. Inclusion is allowing them to sit at your dinner table and share your food and the culture of your house. All right. And I think that's such a powerful description, because we can have diverse companies, but they're not inclusive. We can have, where we bring people into our home, Suki, and we put them in the guest room down at the bottom and we lock the door, because we don't, they're down there. It's like it's your aunt from the UK who arrives. You put them down there. No, I'm just joking. So I like that concept of diversity and inclusion. So inclusion is around having people and accepting everybody for their own, and I think diversity is a richness. It's not some sort of compliance or buzzword, you know what I mean? And I think the other aspect that we need to understand, Angelina, that I think you were kind of going towards, is that a lot of people don't have the muscle to have the conversations because it is very sensitive. So what do? We don't want to tread on those eggshells in case maybe we say something that's insincere, that's it's not right, it's politically incorrect. And that just starts naturally fueling, in my mind, more biases and more fear and that kind of thing, where what we're seeing in the new diversity and inclusion kind of research that I'm certainly involved in, it's around better understanding yourself. And the more you understand yourself of who you are, the better you are able to understand the outside world. I think diversity, in my mind, and this is not coming purely from me, I'm involved in some global research at the moment around diversity. We're interviewing hundreds of people, from CEOs to sports stars, musicians, general person on the street, and we're asking set questions, and the data is revealing something really, really special. And where I'm going with this is it's around, the more I know, the better I do. And that's what I think we need to move towards. So I think I've answered your question in around point.
Suki, if I could give you an example. I had a client, and we talk about, inclusion. So it was a multinational pharmaceutical company, and I have to give them credit, because they created an environment where it was diverse from the perspective that there's different people from different nationalities, different religions and whatnot. But they demonstrated their inclusion because this particular woman practiced prayer during a certain time of the day. So what they did was they created a space, a room, so that this person and other individuals with the same religion mindset could practice their prayers. So that's really a strong definition of inclusion. It's not just, somebody who's from this faith and so they could join our organization. They created an opportunity for them to practice their faith. And that is a true definition of inclusion.
And I would like to refer that back to, they not only invited them into their house, they brought them to the dinner table. They allowed them to sit and talk about who they are, and and that's exactly what I mean. And I think that is such a beautiful example that you give it.
I mean, I'm going to be the first to admit, this is a very difficult conversation for me, because, we've been having this in the Clubhouse group for weeks now, and so forth. But I recognize I've got to have the conversation so I'm better equipped, and I educate myself. So I totally get what you were saying earlier, Roy, that we've got to be prepared for this conversation. But I was fortunate enough, I have both of you in my inner circle, and I was able to come to you and say, okay, I'm out of my depth. This is a scary conversation. I don't want to be offending anybody with my ignorance, if I can use that word. So I was really, really fortunate I had both of yourself. But what about those people that are listening who were exactly where I was, but didn't have individuals like yourself? Where do they even go, or how do they even start to have comfort with this topic? Ange, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think it's about, you're responsible for yourself, right? And so there's lots of opportunities for learnings, such as these type of conversations that we're having, the Clubhouse conversations that we're having. LinkedIn has lots of learnings. There's lots of courses. You can also approach your HR. You can approach your DEI chief as well. There's lots of opportunities for people to learn if they want to learn. So you have to take initiative, your own personal initiative, just like everything else you do in life. You have to set goals. You have to create your own mission and vision statement. What is it that you want out of these learnings? I think it's really, independent learning, as well as piggybacking on your organization.
Roy?
Yeah, I'm not to repeat what Angela said, but I mean, I think it's good to start conversations. It's good to go and listen. Besides the Clubhouse chats that we have, and various conferences or webinars, those are highly recommended. But start with a lot of self-reflection on yourself, what your values are, better understand who you are. There's a beautiful book called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. It's by a guy called Charlie McKeesey, and it's just such a fascinating illustrated book, and I highly recommend it to people. And there's a page with this beautiful illustration, and it says, "What helps you be so accepting of others?" asked the boy. And I think the horse says, "Fully accepting myself." And I think that's something really, really to consider. So a lot of the times when we're not accepting of ourselves, we have this fear, and we start playing what I call the victim bubble. You know what I mean? We sit in this victim bubble, and it's like, woe me, like I'm treated badly. And I find this a lot with, and I certainly don't want to create any storm, but where people have privilege, people become the victim of their own privilege. I'm sick of apologizing for having privilege. I'm sick of that, like that kind of thing. But what we often don't understand is, as much as we also have our own victim bubble, we also have we can be a perpetrator. We have a perpetrator bubble where we have unconscious biases, and we are causing those without even knowing it, the way we do things, the way we conduct meetings. Maybe it's being kind of or excluding. I'm arranging meetings at 5 o'clock in the evening because that suits me. But what I don't realize is Angelina has a daughter or a son or whatever, and she needs to be at home at that time, and I'm excluding her. These kind of, and then, Angelina's not a team player, it's because of, like in this victim and that kind of thing. So I do believe it starts a lot with self, and then having conversations around the office, really having conversations around the office. I mean, the more you know about people, hear people's story. We do a lot of, sorry, Angelina, I'll be one more second. We do a lot of work here in this country around understanding people's stories, specifically how their values are forged. And those values are often forged at a young age. And when people tell these stories, and it's a way we get people to elicit their story, there's often tears in the room, because people go, I didn't know that about you. I did not know that about you. Sorry, Angelina.
No, I that's great. And just to piggyback on what you're saying is create opportunities for others. So become a coach, become a mentor, lift somebody up that you may not have considered before, somebody who looks different or sounds different from you. Take them, embrace them, coach them, mentoring. You're learning, you're coaching and mentoring them, but you're also learning from them as well. I think that's a good exchange.
I think a great exercise, Suki, to add to that, specifically in an office environment or between colleagues, is around unpacking what are the barriers. What are the barriers that we see? And I guarantee you, when you start debating these barriers, what are the barriers to diversity and inclusion in our office? What might seem like there are no barriers in this office. We're all about everybody. And as soon as you start breaking those down, you might find there's a couple of really kind of big barriers that you didn't even realize.
And I totally 100% agree with everything. I'm just now putting myself, because remember, I'm having these conversations with our people in our industry, and I've got two schools of thought, or two questions rather. I'm the person that is, and I'm not going to use the word victim. I'm the person that is different. right? I'm the person that is different. And we often adapt our personalities, our styles, and just to fit in. Okay. And then so you're not being your authentic self, in other words. How does somebody that's in that position even engage in that conversation with the leaders? Because you're talking about, okay, create an environment where you're talking, you're looking internally. But if I know that I'm different to what everybody else is, how do I find my voice to be able to have an opinion? And I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. The privilege conversation at the moment. We all saw or have seen that list that went out, how to be less white. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but we all saw that. And I had some really difficult conversations because my perspective on it was very different. My perspective is, and I think one of the things on it said, and if don't quote me, was be less arrogant, and it's just a blanket statement and all the rest of it. How do you even engage in that conversation? Because when I was speaking to people, they were hushing my voice because I was trying to look at it from a completely different perspective. I was trying to look at it and say, yes, but was that the right way to do it? So if I'm that person, how do I find my voice? How can I even stand up for myself? What can I say? What can I do? How do I even go about having that conversation saying, I disagree? Roy, do you want that one? You're on mute.
I've got like 4 screens and my mouse sometimes gets lost in between one of them and I can't click unmute. I think it's an interesting and it's a very difficult thing to raise. If you are in a minority and to bring something like that to leadership is very difficult. I mean, it's not going to just be an easy conversation. I just want to refer back to the Coke thing that you mentioned. I think personally, and I'll have a go, I think Coke have no concept of what diversity means, because by telling someone to be less something is anti what diversity stands for. I think their notion should be maybe not less white, but maybe let's all try be more human. I think people need to be proud of their race, their human race, not what other, that's where I want to go with diversity. Their human race is what is more important. Be more human. But it is difficult because when you are in the minority, and this is fact, this is proven in our research, when you have one person who is from a very different background, a minority background maybe, or who has been previously excluded, and you are just one of many, we often see that person eventually leaves organizations. Why? And then what happens is in the boardroom, it goes, you see, it's not working. It doesn't work. We hire and they just leave. But it's because there's one person and there's no ability to actually still be yourself. So that conversation needs to start happening at the leadership level. And it's not for the one person to be driving. It's for the leadership to have a better understanding of what is going wrong, what needs to be changed, what are the barriers, what are the myths, and they need to action those from the top down. There's a saying, and it's a little bit difficult for me to put into context because if you don't understand the history of South Africa, it'll be quite hard to understand. But you don't make the minority person the driver of the change. Like, go and have send someone off and go, you're in charge of the diversity program, go and have tea and cake and come back and report to me at the end of the month. There's no mandate, there's no accountability, there's nothing going to happen. It becomes like a bitter divorced wives club, and no offense to bitter divorced wife people, but that's what these things become because there's no mandate. So nothing happens. And then you go, why is nothing changing? Because you're giving, it's not for, it has to be changed holistically. And I hope I'm making sense by it.
It is. It's such a, even as I'm asking the questions and I'm having my thoughts, you can see that they're kind of muddled because it's a conversation we're not used to having. And people probably look at this and say, Siggy, you should have had the questions written down and things like that. But as we're having conversations, thoughts are coming to my mind, and we've got to be prepared to be vulnerable, be seen as, okay, I don't have all the answers, but collectively. But I love what you said about the human race part of it. Totally 100% agree with you on that one, because I just want to flick gears a second. We've had this conversation before because I mentioned it on the Clubhouse. Coming back to our industry, we've got a long way to go. There's an individual. I will keep the countries out of it. We won't go there. Individual person, a minority, and they won the top salesperson. You know how in our industry, top salesman, we celebrate it, fantastic. They won that. And the next morning they turned up at work, and on their desk was some of the most offensive things. I was mortified, I was horrified when I heard this. And we heard it from the actual individual. It's not even hearsay. And this is one of the largest companies in the world, one of the top 100 largest agencies in the world, who supposedly have a policy, all the rest of it. When this individual went to complain, raised it to the powers above, they were suppressed. They were told you can't prove who done it. What if the cleaners had done this? I can't remember whether he went to HR and it got blocked or it got blocked before, so I won't comment on that. To me, I was just absolutely horrified when I heard that. And I know that company, and they talk about having a policy in place, inclusion and all the rest of it. For those viewers that I hope to God nobody else has experienced what this individual has, but those people that are experiencing that type of ignorant hatred type of behaviors internally, and their voice is being suppressed, the powers above will not take it seriously. What do they do? Because we've had this conversation on Clubhouse, so both of you know the exact details of it. But if that individual is watching right now, and what would you say to him? Oh, there you go. I just revealed it's the guy, but okay. What would you say to him?
Well, obviously, the organization does not have equitable practices because they're not meeting the needs of this particular individual. Personally, I would find it difficult to stay in that environment. But prior to that, I would have to go to human rights. I would not sit there dormant like nothing has happened. You have to defend yourself in some form or fashion. And if this person is not successful within their own organization, then they have to look externally. And they also have to find some other individuals who are going to champion beside them. You cannot, if a company's, I understand that we have financial obligations and you have your family and whatnot, but at the same token, if this type of behavior is eradicating your soul, like your whole being, it's not a place for you. You have to find an environment that aligns with who you are as an individual. And so I would encourage this person to leave. That would be my suggestion. It might not be everybody else's suggestion, but it's not healthy. And I don't know if this person has the ability to go above who they spoke to, but I don't think they should just remain silent, because by remaining silent, you're speaking volumes. You need to do something.
But it's also a 2-point fear, because you've got bills and family to feed and all the rest of it. But let's be honest, as an industry, it's very, people talk, right? Just like this story's got to me, I've told everybody about it. I've not told people the company, I don't want to get into any legal, but I have they are a company that we will not work with. They've been trying to get us to work with them, and at some stage, I'll tell them exactly why I don't wish to work with them. But the reality is, even if this individual leaves, there's that backdoor chatter, right? So there's a lot of fear around it, and I want us to, as an industry, and every single leader that is
But
watching.
that's why a human rights action is important, so that there's a different lens. Somebody comes in and motivates them into action. I'm not just saying for him to leave and ignore the situation that happened. Something has to happen from a legal perspective, from a human rights perspective. Roy, would you agree with that? Or
so firstly, I mean, the story you told me, absolutely shocking. And, you know, if it was in our country, I think, you know, I wouldn't want to tell you what would happen, but it's absolutely shocking, and it's unacceptable, and it's unacceptable no matter what country, no matter what company, no matter what industry. I think the difficulty that I'm seeing, Angelina, is as much as you would want to, as an individual, get, you know, the human rights in there, you know, you start getting this stigma around you that you're a trouble causer. You know, you resign, for example. People want to take a reference and they're like, you know, that person, Suki, she's a bit of a trouble causer. You know what I mean? Like, we played a practical joke on her, even though it was a sick and not acceptable joke at all. The reality is how I would approach it if I was this individual. I would start getting kind of groundswell, and I would start having the conversations and start getting people to sponsor and buy into you. I'm sure in an organization like that, there are good people who know that what was done was wrong. And that can start spurring conversation and start having these conversations. I mean, the reality, diversity and inclusion conversations, people often think they're pink and fluffy and they're all HR and they're roses and unicorns. Diversity and inclusion conversations, things like privilege, unconscious bias, they are hard conversations to have. They are sometimes ugly to have, and they sometimes make people feel very uncomfortable, but they need to happen. And I would start with the groundswell. I would bring in people who could back me, who would sponsor me, and take this further up the line to start driving internal change. Obviously, if you have the chance to leave because that kind of company wouldn't resonate with me, I would try and leave if I was that individual. But again, it could be hard. You've got mouths to feed, you've got families. Sometimes the economics don't apply. It is a very precarious situation. I'm just gutted that an organization of I don't know the name of the organization, you told me the story, but I'm just surprised that, you know, nothing more can be done. But I would really start with that groundswell, the sponsors who you work with, the human resources people that you can lean on, the whistleblowing kind of community, maybe a little bit of like social media, that kind of stuff is all very important.
But how is that going to be different than somebody, like I said, you would try to find some champions, right? But with the whistleblowing, and you're talking about obtaining references from those who work there, how is that different than you taking a stance and saying, hey, I am not going to allow you to do this to me. There's going to be an investigation. And with that investigation, there's going to be some kind of change.
Look, 100%. I mean, I think that's the kind of groundswell that I was talking about, is get that momentum and also force those conversations, force the hard conversations. You know, I just hope that kind of company would be open to something like that, but I'm not sure it sounds like it is, which is disappointing.
I think what it boils down to is I think we're all agreeing something needs to happen, and the voice needs to be heard. But what I'm hoping, as we're having these conversations, this individual and anybody else recognizes that they're not alone. And they do have the power, because, you know, you heard me say it at the women's panel last week. People only take your power if you choose to give it. It's taken me a long time to learn that myself, right? But I want to, and I'm conscious of time, I just want to pivot to something else that I'm being asked a lot. Companies are asking, and I'm sure both of yourself are experiencing in your business, everybody's trying to, let's just take women, because last week was we had the Women's Day panel and International Women's Day. We don't have enough women on our leadership team. You know what, Suki, can you get me a woman? I'd like a woman. Suki, we don't have enough color representation. Can you get me a African American or this or, and I'm also hearing the reverse. We have, and I'm hearing this in tech, we have too many of this, right? We have too, we don't want this. The reality is pretty much rest of the world, everywhere, that's illegal, right? And whilst I think it's great intention, it's illegal, and it's also discriminates. Let's just take the women example. It's discriminating against a man that can do the job, right? We're now being asked to discriminate there. How do we, as the recruitment industry, educate our client? How do we advocate for equality, inclusion, but how do we also advocate for our candidates and ensure the best person gets the job? I know that's a big, wide question, but even I hear this all the time. I keep getting this question all the time. Suki, how do we handle this? Our clients are asking us for this.
Is it really discriminatory if there's less representation of a certain inclusion, let's say? Is it really discriminatory? What the kind of conversations I have with my client is asking them the why. Why do they want to, why is their strategy directed in this way? But also ensuring that we disclose to them that we will go to marginalized or racialized communities. However, we're going to be inclusive. And what we do at that point is all of our interview practices are, with a panel internally. So it's myself and a couple of recruiters who are having the conversations with these candidates and involving them in extracting information to share with the client. And so what we do is we provide the client with a snapshot of this person's capability, not necessarily disclosing their name, not necessarily disclosing where they went to school. And so we're trying to ensure that we are presenting all candidates in a manner that is the same. And so then they would be able to choose who they wish to proceed with based on the profile that we've shared with them. So we're not excluding anybody from the process. We're just including other communities that may not have been included before, if that makes sense.
That does. And Roy, do you have anything to add to that? You're on mute, I think.
I definitely do, and I'm getting used to this mute button. So, I mean, we come from a slightly different background. We have what we call Employment Equity Act, which is actually, it's a law that allows you to promote equity in the workplace. So we have legislation in this country, which I think is a really good thing. I think it does allow you to offer equal opportunities to people who maybe have had less opportunity in the past. So I think that is something to consider. I think I like the idea that bringing different thinking, because again, to my point, diversity is not just black, white, male, female. It's you hiring people who, often we hire think like me, look like me, speak like me, which is not necessarily meaning they can do an amazing job. You know what I mean? So we start boxing, and we got to move away from that thinking. We got to hire differently. And I mean, I was in a conversation earlier today that talked around how we keep just putting the same boxes and we do the same thing over and over again. And I think we've got to look at, when we bring in a diverse mix of candidates, and I like to look at what are the demographics of your country, and maybe have a mix of CVs, a mix of people, So you're not excluding people necessarily, but you're adding a new dimension of people who maybe would not have had that opportunity to come in. And I think that's a good way to start that conversation. It is law in our country, so it's hard for me to relate. We can kind of state you can only hire a female, for example, and that's legally allowed. So we can get around that a lot easier than you guys can. But I think it's around that dimension of adding that diverse thinking, like hire differently.
I think it's so funny because I've been working the South Africa market for about 8 years now, maybe 9. And when I first started working South Africa, and actually it was a lady at one of the AdCorp, presidents for one of the AdCorp business units, and she was explaining how it worked. I just had to completely unlearn, think everything I knew, because she would tell me, you're going to get this code, and this is what this code means, right? And you're going to get this code, and that means you have to present candidates in that. So it really is, you guys definitely have a uniqueness there in that sense, but to your point, given the history. But here's where...
Can I just add something quickly there? I think...
Sorry?
Can I just add, I do believe when that Employment Equity Act is used correctly, I think it is phenomenal, and what it can add. And what it's really saying is that in a race of life, certain people are maybe a bit further down the line before the gun actually goes off. Some people are sitting on the 20-meter mark, 50-meter mark. Let's say it's a 100-meter race. Some people haven't even had the opportunity to put their shoes on yet because of their upbringing, because of where they've come from, because they're marginalized. And what this does is it allows people to go, you know what, let's give an opportunity, because it doesn't say you can't run, because you can run and you are talented and you are unique and you can contribute. And that's what I think needs to be looked at. It's about the opportunity.
So I think we're looking at it from the same lens, really and truly. Even though we're in Canada, we are sourcing, like I said, from some communities that may not have been considered previously, and throwing everybody into the mix and ensuring that everybody has representation, even from a coaching, mentoring perspective. So I agree.
But I think I want to just, again, playing devil's advocate here. This is all great,
Yeah.
Me as the recruiter sitting at one of these big multinationals, can I have that conversation with the client? And the client's like, no, I just want a woman. Don't present me CVs that are not women. We are only going to hire a woman.
Mm-hmm.
That goes against, the way you, Brunel, are doing it, and I totally get that. But no. And then we have this scarcity, this fear. Oh my God, I'm going to lose this client.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I'm going to lose this client. I'm not going to close this deal, blah, 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 blah. And my boss, and especially if it's a national account, a global account, and things like that. So there's that fear piece that comes into it. I think one of the things we have to get comfortable with,
Mm-hmm.
and companies have to get comfortable, is those clients walking away. And on that note, I'm going to share a quick story. So, as you know, I've done the women's panel, and the individuals were amazing women in their own right, strong, powerful, authentic, etc., etc. Well, I actually got fired by a client over that, and the irony was, it was Women's Day panel. I actually got fired over a client because the client had a different opinion of that particular panel. And as a business owner, as a woman, it completely threw me for a loop in the first place, because I was trying to do something nice and what have you. And anyhow, long story short, this massive company decided they no longer wanted to do business with me because of that. And I'll admit, as a small business, I was really taken back. It was a shock to the system because I just didn't expect it to happen. But I'll tell you what, the next morning, I woke up and I felt really good. Forget the financial. forget the financial aspect of it. The way I interpreted it, and maybe I'm further ahead than some of the people watching this, the way I interpreted it, I thought, you know what, that's not a client that I'm aligned with. And then I'm not aligned with them. They're not aligned with me. It's not authentic. It's not authentic. And now that's opened up space for me to take on another client. And no word of a lie, it must have been 3 or 4 days later. Okay, not the same volume of business, granted, not in the same space, but I got another client on, net new client that reached out to me. I hadn't even made a sales call, but I secured an exclusive deal with them, and today we're getting a massive offer for their head of delivery director. And the way I'm looking at it, the reason I'm bringing this up, yes, I freaked out because nobody wants to lose a client. I had my moment, and I allowed myself to have that moment. And then I looked for it and said, okay, what else? It's given me space for other things. And then the universe, I know I'm talking about the universe, but what I want to say to everybody is it will happen. You will lose clients. You will lose clients. Those clients that are hell-bent on hiring just a woman. And if you're trying to give them, you're trying to educate them and it still doesn't work, let them go. It's easier said than done. And the reason I shared the story was before I said let them go, I want people to know that I'm saying what I've actually done. Fair enough, they kind of let me go, but I did not try and retain that business. I did not apologize for not doing what they want. I apologized for how they felt. I said, I'm sorry you feel like that. I did say that. But everything else, I just let it go. So I think and I'm not saying this to be the old big martyr, look how great I am, right? I'm sharing this story because it's happening in our industry. Unless we stand up and let those clients go, we're not going to be able to educate people. We're not going to be able to bring in clients that are more aligned. And honestly, the money goes short term, comes from somewhere else. And I know it's easy for me to say that because I run my own business. I get it. I know there's many people watching this thing and say, but Suki, you run your own business. It's easy.
No, I agree with you. Like, it's just transactional. And if it does not align with who you are as a person, what's the sense? You know, with Brunel, our passion is people. So we need to walk the talk. And that's the type of people that we work with. Like, we're very passionate about people. And so passion for people means that you want to be inclusive. You want to treat people equitable. You want to have a diverse segment of the population that you can introduce to your clients. It's part of your vision, your mission, your values. And so if it aligns with you personally, it's easier to walk away, I believe, Suki.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shock to the system. Of course it is, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But and this is why I'm having these conversations, because until we look internally, right, until we peel back the layers, peel back the covers and see what we as an industry are doing, as an industry, as companies, and to your point earlier, Ange, as individuals.
Listen, let me tell you a story that happened to me when I was independent. I was doing advertising at the time. This is before life sciences, and this is before LinkedIn. So I'm really giving my age away and all this kind of stuff. But I was working with a client, and I presented a woman, a Black woman, and she went into the organization. She had the interview, and they said to me, she's not a cultural fit. I'm like, well, what does that mean? And the end result is she didn't look like them and she didn't sound like them. And so I let the client go. They didn't even know who they were dealing with on the other side of the phone.
Yeah.
And so does that align with who I am? Hell no. Like, see ya.
It's having the confidence, right? Roy, we're taking over the conversation here. Sorry.
It could have been different for me because I could really relate to this person. But what if you don't relate?
Yeah, I think culture sometimes is really also, used as a barrier quite quickly, for just, which is not really the truth, because if you really unpack what culture is, what is a good culture? A good culture is a committed culture, and a committed culture comes from people living their deepest personal values. And this comes from a guy called Stan Slap, who's one of the most thought for thinkers in culture. He's out of San Francisco, and I've had the privilege of working with him. And when you let people live their personal values at work, and you allow them, that's where the magic happens. You're aligning that business case with the human case. And when you go, not a culture fit, I can guarantee you I'm fearful. I need to hire someone who looks like me, thinks like me, speaks like me, because I'm going to just get my bonus at the end of the year and I'll be fine. And that's not the way we need to be thinking about diversity or inclusion.
So on that note, so when we speak with clients, what would you suggest? Because, one of the traditional questions is like, how would you describe the culture of your organization? So what suggestions would you have for people in our industry?
Is that question directed at me?
Yeah, like I'm directing at all of us, describe your dynamics of the organization. I would more or less pose the question about your philosophy. What's your philosophy around what is your DEI strategy, things like that, as opposed to, being an intaker of a job requisite and saying, describe your culture. I think, like you said, Roy, like just kind of get rid of that word, because it's a code.
Yeah. So I think for me, we've had the privilege in our country. These are conversations we've had to have because of our terrible past. And, I think it's given us a certain amount of muscle to have different types of conversations. I think the problem is when you go in and you unload, clients will automatically, get away from me. I just need to hire someone. It's around raising consciousness. It's about inviting clients to conversations like this. It's about inviting clients to read certain material. It's about, really just spurring that curiosity. Get people to pay more and more attention to this human case towards diversity, and unpacking. That I need to think about this differently. When you go in hard straight away, people will automatically fear up, armor up. They don't have the muscle to have these kind of conversations with folks. So that would be my first approach. The second approach is obviously, deal with clients on that basis of, putting who you are first, what you stand for. And if you get a company that is very anti you, my question is, do you want to deal with it? Sometimes you have no choice. You are mandated to deal with a company and you have to go and get your numbers. I get that. But then spur the conversation internally. Once you've raised that consciousness, start the conversation. Start it internally, start it externally, start it with clients, whatever. You know what I mean? And that's where you'll start moving towards maybe what I think is a kind of more authentic transformation in thinking. That's my 2 cents worth in the time we have.
I think also with the culture question, that's a really good question you posed there, though, right? And but as I've been listening and I've been thinking, how have I been approaching that? And this is not me approaching it the way you are posed the question, but now that I'm having these conversations, one of the questions I tend to ask is, what doesn't work, right? And they'll say whatever. And then I'll help them unpack why they think that doesn't work. And although it's not really handling the culture piece, but I find it allows the conversation to open up. But I'd love to think about that one. How would I really handle that question? And maybe that's the question we're going to have on the panel in April, right? Guys, look, I'm so conscious of time. I think this conversation can keep going and going. I just want to wrap up and say the reality is this is a difficult conversation to start, and people will silence your voice. They will try, because he who shouts the loudest, right? we as an industry we're in the people business. If we're not, we're advocating for our candidates. No, we're advocating for our candidates as long as they fit this mold that we've been told to find. We got to take those blinkers off. We got to, as leaders, we've got to look in the mirror. We've got to look in the mirror because we're telling our clients, absolutely, we have this diversity policy and this is what it is and all the rest of it, yet we're not practicing what we preach. So we have to do that. To your point earlier, Ange, we have to start people that are being victims. And again, I couldn't think of another word, but I don't like that word, but you'll understand what I mean. We got to let them know they're not by themselves and they can do something. They do have the power. So in wrapping up, is there anything, Ange, that you want to add before I close off?
Yeah, we talked about our learnings and how could we get involved. I would say if you're in a position to mentor or coach someone who looks different than you, sounds different from you, take advantage of it because you're going to learn a lot as well. So share what you know with somebody else.
Brilliant. Roy?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, Suki, these are not easy conversations, and I think, but they need to happen. There's a quote. I don't know who said it. I love a bit of a quote, and it's about diversity is about all of us. I think it's about we have to figure out how to walk this world together. And it refers me to what Brene Brown talks about in one of her books, Braving the Wilderness. I love Brene Brown. I think the work she does is around vulnerability, talks a lot to where we're going with diversity and inclusion. And it talks about, if we're gonna change what is happening in a meaningful way, we're gonna have to be intentional with people who are different from us. You know what I mean? I think she talks around, we have to sign up, take a seat at the table, have the hard conversations, look for joy, those kind of things. And that's what we really got to focus on. And I welcome the conversation with anybody at any point. I think it's good to talk and, try be less defensive. People get defensive all the time, and it's our victim bubble. And that's kind of my parting words. So thank you for the opportunity. Angelina, your knowledge is incredible, as yours, Suki. Thank you for the chance.
Yeah, this is a topic that I do not feel equipped to have, but I'm prepared to put myself out there and start. And that's what, you guys have been so valuable to me, even in my learning. And I've got a long, long way to go. And that's why I brought this to the group. So on that note, let me wrap up. Yeah, exactly as Roy said, if anybody wants to talk more, reach out to either of yourself and start the conversation.
And Clubhouse tomorrow.
Yes, thank you. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Clubhouse. Every Thursday, 8 a.m. Eastern. The three of us are in Clubhouse and we are having this conversation. Last week, we were talking about the Royals. And that created a lot of healthy debate. But that's what we do. We've got to be having these conversations. So 8 a.m. Clubhouse tomorrow. Look out for the panel. I will announce the panel dates, hopefully in the next 2 weeks or so. We just got to sort all of that out. The reality is, at the end of the day, we need to be standing up for each other. We need to be empowering each other. And Roy, I love you sent me that picture on WhatsApp a couple of weeks ago of an panel interview, and it's just 5 or 6 men interviewing one girl. And that's kind of so old school. We got to stop that. We got to open our minds up, and the only way we're going to make change is if we look internally first. Look in the mirror. Each and every person look in the mirror. And if somebody has a different opinion, take a step back. Hear them out. Because it's usually, for the most part, it's fear. It's fear. It's that scarcity. If I make room for you, that means there is less room for me, which is not true.
No.
That's absolutely not true. So, anyway, guys, thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Roy. It's always a pleasure. I always learn so much. Talk to you.
I will see you guys at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning in Clubhouse.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.